Okay. It is really, truly my pleasure to introduce our next two speakers. Ruth and Danielle are two individuals who truly understand the community here and have put out with their whole hearts, their knowledge, and their ability to serve this community. And now let me so Ruth is not only one of the few voices that pioneered the idea and need for acknowledging the TCK and cross-cultural individual. She's also the reason that we are all here today at FIGT. And I think for all of us who have come year after year, and hopefully for all of you that are newcomers, you will agree that FIGT is truly a wonderful gathering. Like Ruth, Daniela has been a driving and dedicated force for FIGT. She has served on the board, and now she's developed an affiliate group providing coaching and counseling for the mobile community, making sure that our community has gets the mental health care and well-being care they need by professionals that understand our lifestyle. And Daniela wanted me to say to you, Ruth, that she really appreciates the friendship she's developed with you over the years at FIGT. And Ruth says likewise. But I don't think their case is, and I don't think their case is unique. I think many of us have developed very important and special friendships at FIGT, and I hope many of the newcomers will feel the same way by the end of this conference. So please join me in introducing two trailblazers that jumped into the arena of analyzing and measuring the human condition. That we all need an identity, we all need to be accepted with that identity, and we all need to belong. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Daniela. And I'm Ruth, in case you don't know. Which is which? Oh. Okay. Hello. Hello. Okay.
We can do it. We
Yes.
said we were friends.
Just like that.
It's been an interesting day already, so we'll just make it more interesting. How's that? All right, we're going to start all over again.
I'm Daniela.
And I'm Ruth. Okay. We are, thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I wanted to say to all of you, especially you newcomers, if there's anything we want you to know today, is that we are a thinking community, and this whole topic, if you really think about it, we're in the middle of a grand social experiment that nobody has ever done before in all the history of the world. Did you ever realize that? You're part of that. You are not the spectators in the stands, guys. We are all the players in the field, and we're the ones who have to figure it out because nobody's figured it out before us. So the way, for the 35 years I've worked with third culture kids who are from one place, grew up in another, in case you didn't have that down yet, well you should, but if you don't, I'm telling you, it's called TCKs. So what we figured out was a piece at a time. So Daniela comes up to me and she says, I think we still haven't figured it all out. And I said, but we've worked very hard to figure it all out. And she said, but nobody is really talking that I can see about the adult identity. I thought, well, they don't have any, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, so there we go. So we decided to start having, you're going to have to click, I think, because I can't click and hug you.
Okay.
So there we are.
Yeah, it's going too fast. So the one thing, when we started this conversation, we realized a very simple thing is that the world is changing. And the first thing we want to point out is actually mobility. When you think about it, the amount of people that are here and the mileage which we covered just by coming here, it's unbelievable. And we couldn't do it like 50 years ago. So the change is really fast. Oh, so fast that we are Oh.
Oh, but it was so much more fun to hug her. It's okay. Technology has also changed, as we know. When I was a child, I remember asking my parents, were you alive in the old days? And they said, what do you mean the old days? I said, well, you know, like before there were cars. And they said, no, we're not that old. But I remember saying to them, I feel so sad because I don't think there's anything new to invent. And we were still using a wood stove where I was growing up, and I had no idea microwaves would ever come in.
And if we talk about communication, so I remember writing a lot of letters and waiting for weeks to get something from my friends and my family from all over the world. And now, of course, we are communicating very differently, and this is just one part of the communication. But just start to think about all these changes because that will lead our conversation. And it is an open conversation. So please join us.
Yes, this is an open conversation. We hope to get it started, and then you can talk to us the rest of the time. So Daniela, you're a psychologist. And because of technology, she does work all over the world, right? What have you figured out from, or heard from the people you're talking with, that how are these changes impacting people? Because it's our personal lives we're also impacting, it's just not the globe.
So the big change that I started to notice and pointed out is actually that we are shifting from what we called identity for life, in which we had the first part of our life trying to find out who we are, and then the second part just living accordingly. And then we could find things like my mother-in-law is a teacher in Israel, and that's it, identity for life. So you practically knew what to plan and how the life will go on. But this is not the case anymore. And I dare to challenge you, because you did a great job putting, you know, all the knowledge we have about the TCK. But even that, after these kids realize that, okay, I'm a TCK, this is my identity, we assume that once they have it, they will have own this identity for life. And I want to challenge that assumption.
Well, I want you to know this is a community you can challenge. Because, like I said, it's a developing topic. And so I really appreciated when she asked me that, because, of course, I think when the TCK topic started, most of our parents had grown up monoculturally, right? And so I've gone around the world telling people that the difference for a third culture kid and the parent is the parent already knew who they were, and we're still having to figure it out, you know, from the different cultures we're in. So I'm willing to be challenged, and I like to be challenged, and I hope that you do too, because we're not in a static topic. So,
Oh.
oops, we got 2 clickers now.
Oh, wait, I'm losing it.
You got it, Mike. I don't have to give you any more.
So this is the one we needed. So we agreed, I think, that the world is changing and many things are changing, and maybe our identities are changing faster than we assumed so far. But the one thing we did find out is that one thing remains constant, and this is our basic need to belong. As human beings, no matter what, and maybe we can belong differently right now, but this is the one thing that is a constant.
So the question is, how do we keep a sense of belonging in a world that's always changing? That's the bottom line question. All right?
So the first thing we would like to do is actually encourage you to be participants even in this conversation. So we want you to take really 1 minute and try to answer this simple question. Who are you? In one sentence, not more than one sentence. Don't add anything, don't change anything. If you want, you can write it. If you want, you can use your mobile device to do it. And then just turn to somebody that you don't know and introduce yourself with 1 sentence. Hear back the 1 sentence. Don't talk about it. Just let it be.
There you go. Can do it? It's
1 minute. I don't really have a... it's enough?
First it's hardly written, and then they haven't shared it. Give them another 30 seconds. They just need to know that it's hard.
So now it's you.
I usually watch just see the first two talk. Yeah, some are still writing.
Okay, I think it's enough.
Okay. Oops. Have you had a chance to share?
Okay, you seem to be enjoying yourself. We can just go. Woo.
All right. That's harder to do than you might know, isn't it? Huh? More time? More time. Okay. Maybe go more time.
One sentence. One sentence. It should not take too long.
But it takes long to think of the one sentence. Oh, we're going to be teachers.
All right. Okay, we're back.
So we're going to try and come back to that. Was that harder than you thought? Yes, very harder than you thought. I mean, it was harder than in fact, I don't have my answer yet. Don't worry about it. But so when we were going to do this and start our conversation, Daniela, even though she was challenging me, was kind enough to say we could use a model that a friend made for me after we were talking about identity formation one time. And she said, why is this such a problem for you guys? She's, didn't grow up our way, but that's okay. She's a thinker. And she's also an artist, so she draws things. And she came back to me and she said, Ruth, I think if you start with this kind of a model, you could think it through a little bit. Right there in the middle, you have the child. Okay, we're still talking about children. We're going to get to the adults. Don't panic, Daniela. But when you think of a child and they're born, they are already born as a human being, right? They are born as relational beings. They're born with emotion. They're born with people who ultimately can make choice. And they're people who can think, and they're spiritual and physical beings. If you really think about all of the needs that we have as humans, it comes from being made in this most basic way. So how is it that we have these needs met, and how is it that we find our belonging and all that? So
when I first saw this model, I must say that it was really seems very simple, very intuitive, and I could really relate to that. Actually, these three anchors that we have, the family, the community, and the place, seems to be very, very understandable. We always relate to all of them, and we build our identity around them. So I can definitely relate to that and think about myself and think about people I work with this model. But Ruth, how did it came about being also mirrors?
Well, Barb came back and she said it's not only a deep anchor, those places that we can belong, but it's from those places we get our sense of identity. We get mirrored back to us who we are. When you think again about the ugly duckling who didn't know who he was because he didn't have a proper mirror, and the mirror that was around him, that was his family, said, you don't belong, didn't it? It gave a message. And so it is from these places around us that we receive messages about who we are, both for good and for bad. And so she said, I think they're both anchors and they're mirrors.
So we use it as the traditional model to understand how we actually build our own identity in a cultural context, but not only in that. And we found out that if we actually grow in a very stable community with our own family around, and we know the place around us, we can have this sense of a belonging, and we can have
cultural balance where we know how it goes. And I want to add one other thing, Daniela, that part of the identity formation is not just the roots and anchors directly towards us, but the relationship like a family to place, family to our community, who our parents are gives us a certain status or not status, right? Our family is the one who should teach us about how we operate in this place. We see the community, we learn from it. How do we operate? And what I liked about her picture was, if you look at this picture, it's like there's arms around you. And it's a safe place. It's a safe place where you're right in the middle and everything's nice and cozy. We realize this is optimistic, but we're talking about in the basic place, if life is going as it should be. There's a place of strong identity, a sense of belonging, and the confidence we know what's ahead because you can see it. You see the people who've gone the path before you. You know where you're headed.
So summing all of them, we have this sense of identity, which if we feel comfortable with this cultural balance, which means that we know to navigate our surroundings, we know what to expect, we know how to behave, and we know who is me and who are the others, and we can feel comfortable with that, we can feel really good about who we are.
We didn't even have to think about it. My mother is a great example of that. She was born in Chicago in 1919. She moved to their only other house when she was 4 years old. She grew up there. She went to Africa for 34 years, but she was always from Chicago. So no matter how old she got, she knew where she started, where she was from. Even with speaking another language, she was from Chicago. And in her last years of dementia, she would still say to me things like, she'd talk about somebody and I'd say, who's that? She said, you know who that is. They're in the red house down the street. And because she still had them all organized in her mind.
But your story is a bit different.
Well, just a little bit. I was born in Kano, Nigeria. And in the first 3 years, my life was probably like my mother's. It was stable, right? My community was very diverse compared to my mother's, but it was my world. I knew it. I knew when I spoke Hausa. I knew if I didn't. My nanny was Hausa. My mother was, American. But I knew how this world navigated, and it was fine. Then we took our first airplane ride to the States, and guess what? I lost my community, right? I lost my place. All the things that I knew about how life was supposed to work here kind of got messed up a little bit, but of course I had a new community and I had a new place. Now, at 3, when it was the first time, that was okay. I still had my family. It was still very secure. But when we went back to Nigeria, and then when I was 6, I had another major change in all these things. My community changed when I took an airplane to go to boarding school, and I was 6 years old. My place changed. Instead of being able to go roaming where I was, we always had to stay on the station. We had to stay on the campus because, of course, they wanted us to be safe. Well, guess what also changed? My family. And suddenly, all the rules, even for what I was supposed to be and do, changed. One thing I remember from that time was how anxious I was. My mother always said, you're such a worrywart. And I thought, well, there was a lot to worry about, Mom. If everything changes, you don't know how you're supposed to do it. And if you do it the wrong way, you can get punished. And punishments sometimes are pretty severe. So I was always trying to make sure that I kept the rules, except I didn't always know what they were. So that was a big change for me. Then we went on. And I did the usual repatriation that many of you have done. And at that point, I found out that not only did my worlds all change, when we first did this, we had so many circles we thought you'd get dizzy, so we just let them be. But the worlds, if you think about it, for all of us in this, those worlds, and they all keep changing. So I went back to the States, thought I wasn't so US as I thought, so I put my Africa self away, I went to high school, and I became American.
So in theory, you were following everything. So
fun.
by the age of 18, you had a strong identity. You knew you were American. And
A little pretend, but it was pretty,
Okay. And then what happened?
Well, I went to college. Not only did I put away my Africa self, I didn't want to be associated with anybody like I had been. Because there were a bunch of kids who'd come from Africa like recently. I did not want to be near them because guess what? I didn't anybody think I was ignorant as them, because when I came back, I was pretty ignorant about the social, and I had worked really hard. So I ignored them. I went to my nursing. I married my husband, and I was fine. I was fine, as far as I knew. But when my husband was a senior in medical school, I had another little identity crisis because he was going to go and do what do you call it, locum, but
Fellowship?
elective, he was a student in Africa. So we got a scholarship, applied to go to Nigeria, and they wouldn't let me have a visa. I thought, excuse me.
She was born there, if you don't remember.
It's in my passport. They stopped me at all the immigration. They look up, they say, you were born where? I said, oh, it's Nigeria. They wouldn't let me back. I said, you're my country. I'm not your person. So we went to Liberia. I was a little vexed. So that was an identity crisis. Which am I? Then we went on, and when I came back, I actually had to think about the whole thing of who I am. I didn't realize I'd lifted the curtain from my Africa self, and I couldn't put it down again. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was I was very depressed. And so all of a sudden, my whole image of myself as this person who was competent and able and, blah, 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 wasn't. And then, who am I after all that?
How old were you?
Well, at that point, I was about 25, 26. And so life went on because sometimes we just get through. I didn't go for counseling because probably it was maybe a good thing because probably nobody would have known how to help me. But I think also my image was I don't need it. I know how to do life, right? I'm strong. I'm able. But I wasn't. But I didn't want to tell anybody else that. So we went to the Navy. My husband had a different schedule. And life settled down, and so I thought, okay, that was a blip in my screen. We went back to Liberia, I raised my kids there, and then when I was 39, our daughter was going to leave just for a few months ahead of us, and I had this major reaction. And that's when I started to journal, because I thought, what is this thing that is this intermittent depression? And so I started to journal, and I started with my first night in boarding school. And I started to realize that I even had to re-examine my past, that I hadn't been as successful as I thought as a child, that it had been much harder for me. I'd always defended it. And so that became a whole nother story.
And what happened next?
Well, we went back to Indianapolis, and I really tried hard to be a suburban housewife. It didn't go too well. So I really was trying. I don't have my curtains right and all those things, but I tried. But one day, I was talking to some lady, and she said something, and I said something about Africa and when I'd been there, and she said, well, that's why everybody thinks you're so arrogant. You think you know everything because you've been everywhere. And I thought, I'm never going to fit. I'm never going to fit. Because I said back to her, I said, as long as I pretend to be a suburban housewife, I have a place. But if I ever tell you who I really am, I don't have a place anymore. She said, what, are you just faking it? And I went in the closet and I sat for 30 minutes thinking she'd come and apologize, and she didn't. So then I had to come out and pretend I was fine. And so then we went to Kenya. My husband was he worked for IU, and they were starting a program. The first night we sat there, they had all these people, you know how you invite everybody around so you can get to meet each other. And they're all telling who they are. One guy was doing something with the penguins 3 weeks ago in Antarctica. Somebody else was out in the Masai Mara, and he's counting the whiskers on the lions. And everybody's got a weirder story than the last person. And I thought, if you were in Indianapolis, they'd think you guys were crazy. But you're not. This is what we do, crazy stuff. Except it isn't crazy, it's normal. And that was the moment I thought, this is my group. I do belong here. Maybe we're not all gathered in one place, but I have a sense at home. So when I went back to the States, then for some reason it was totally different. Like, it's okay that you don't know who I am in this way, because I don't know who you are in your way when you go to work, but we can be friends in different ways. And so that sense of belonging actually grew because there were different ways to belong. And so one day I went to Afghanistan and I was doing something, and I'd taken little planes here, and I'd done this and that, and I was sitting there, and I thought, I bet, again, my friends in Indianapolis would think this was very strange tonight. But I felt like all the pieces of my life came together in this trip for different reasons. And it's like it all came there, and I thought I was born to do this. And that was the most wonderful feeling in the world. I thought I was born to do this. It may not fit anybody else's story. It may not fit anybody else's life, but each of us is unique. And each of us was born to do what we've been given to do. So that's my story. Oh, I did forget one part, didn't I? There's also been the progression, that's what I'm trying to say, that somewhere along the way I met Dave Pollack, and of course he was working with the things that Ruth Useem and Anne Cottrell, she's one of our originals, preceded me even, and working with the Third Culture Kid profile. But as it was progressing, and so many people were saying as the world was changing, that I've experienced what you're talking about, but I didn't do it your way. So we tried to get a little bigger model so that you could be, the TCK is one way you can grow up cross-culturally, but more and more and more as the world is becoming complex, TCKs often aren't just like me going between two countries. They can be in 3 and 4 circles. And that's why you're going to listen to Daniela's story. She's one of the new.
Yes, I'm happy to be the new, and I'm happy to support actually this model because I think that there is a lot of value in extending our tent. That was the way that you put it then. It's important to understand that there are many ways to be actually influenced by different cultures and by different communities, and we should include all of them and better understand them. So if you didn't notice, we are following Joe's recommendation from this morning, and we are taking a risk and telling our stories. And we hope that through our stories you will understand what is that model, and you can take that model with you to your own life and to your own jobs. So, sorry. Yes.
Yes, I won't click for you.
Okay. So, yes, this is my story. So, my story begins in... Dana is telling me that it's not loud enough. Ah, okay. Any better? Thank you, Dana. It's good to have supporters there, you know. It makes me feel much more comfortable. So, back to the beginning of my story. I was born in Argentina. The generation of my grandparents actually came from Russia and Poland. My parents were the first generation born in Argentina, and my sister and myself, you know, were the product, thinking that this will be stability for life. But as many Jewish stories, actually we kept on moving for different reasons. So I started my life there, and until the age of eight, that was my reality. I didn't know at the time that I was a cross-cultural kid, but I was a cross-cultural kid already then because I was living in between worlds. I had many languages in my house, so Polish, Russian, Spanish, Yiddish. Half of my family is actually Christian because of mixed marriages. For us, mixed marriages means like Jewish and Christians. And we were celebrating a bit of this and a bit of that, but for me, that was my reality. So that was my normal life. Until the point that because of history and circumstances, we were forced actually to move. And I won't take you through all the story, but after, oh no, no. Okay, so the first move actually from Argentina to Israel obviously changed my community, changed my place, and changed my family because, as we said before, when your parents are transitioning from one place to the other and they totally lose their status, their ability even to communicate, my parents didn't know Hebrew, they couldn't guide us, it was actually changing everything around me. So that was very, very significant. But we did what many of us are very familiar with, and we just cope with it. And by the age of 18, I became totally Israeli. I was very comfortable with my identity at the time. You can see me here serving in the army. That's the common thing that we do in Israel. And I felt that I belong. I did my part, and that was very clear and normal. And life, now, okay. And life goes on, and I continue building my life, my identity. I got married. This is Nadav, great guy. I became, no, this. I became a clinical psychologist, and I had my 4 wonderful kids. And for me, life was perfect. I felt comfortable, I felt confident, I had a sense of belonging, everything was just fine. Until the moment that my husband, you know, he grew up in Israel, he wanted to see the world, and he came with this great idea, you know, I have this opportunity, I can work abroad, why don't we relocate and start a new life? And I said, niente, which means no way. I knew what it is all about. I had to do it once, and it was painful. And I was the poster girl of a successful transition, and still, I knew that it would be so hard. I was terrified for my kids, and I was terrified for myself. So, no. For 5 years, he commuted from Israel to Europe. Meanwhile, I built my professional life, of course, my social life. I was super happy, but after 5 years, I had to agree that, okay, we can give it a try. And I agreed to move to Belgium. So we moved to Belgium, very different, totally, to a point that this is, well, we had Matilda, I think, with Belgian connection. Yes, so she knows that even in Belgium, it's so confusing because you don't have just one language, you know, you have several languages. You have to choose which language to speak and to know. And I didn't know French at the time, that it was hard enough to have the Spanish, the Hebrew, trying to speak English, and now the French or Flemish. Horrendous. Not really an easy transition, I would say. But this is what happened. So, in that sense, my family, again, had to deal with great change. Oops. Thank you. And the last one. So everything changed around me. But the difference was that I was 39. And that was a shock for me. Because at 39, you know who you are. And how just by taking a plane, you just lose everything. And you almost forget who you are and what you're capable of. And there was nothing. All these anchors that were so deep and solid suddenly meant nothing. And my new anchors that you see there, they were not deep enough to hold anything. So no stability and no sense of belonging. So this is, again, we meet that. And my surprise was that how is it possible at this age to feel that you're losing your identity completely? I honestly believe that it will be hard, but I didn't anticipate to lose it all. So, what happened then? I wish I could tell that it was a very fast process. It wasn't. It took me years to come back to myself, to allow myself to feel that I'm the same capable person that can communicate in the same way, do my things. How did it happen? And this is, I think, the magic of this model that we are trying to present. For me, it works only if an anchor is becoming something that provides this sense of belonging. But how does it happen? You only can use this anchor if you feel part of something, if you feel accepted, which means that we can have a lot of anchors. And when you think about your lives, you probably had been in many places with many communities, but only if you feel the sense of belonging, it becomes something that is meaningful to you and building your own identity. So for me, I will start for the example of FIGT. And this is another thing that I want to thank you for your book. But my story is not like many other stories that I read the book and I said, oh, this is me. No, totally not. I read the book because I was about to transition to Belgium. And I was thinking about my kids, obviously. So I read the book for my kids. I was very grateful. But I wasn't thinking about myself at all. I didn't find really myself there. It was about them. So it took me a few more years until I dared to come to this conference. And when I came, I found my community. But even then, the one question I remember I asked you in the first time, I said, how come it's so perfect English here? Why don't we hear more accents? And when I think about it, I was asking, can I really belong here? I felt so embarrassed, so uncomfortable with my broken English. And I just was asking permission to belong to this community. Luckily, they accepted me.
Can I also make a little point? The thing that was so wonderful to me about Daniela was that instead of just looking and criticizing us, when I said, well, we need some more help, she jumped in to become the program chair because she thought, well, I could control it then, but now that. But we needed her input. We needed her help because none of us know it all. So I want to say to all you new people, please keep thinking and jumping in. Now you can continue. Thank you.
Okay. And my other point that I want to say, and this is very personal for me, what worked for me and helped me to change these anchors into something that will be really meaningful to me was through sports. And the really wonderful thing about sports is that you don't need language. So you sweat together, you miss together, whatever it is, but you can feel yourself because you're not relying on that language. So I always, whenever I move, I just look for some team sports. I really recommend that. So I had in Israel my running team, and I had in Belgium my basketball team, and I have now my catchball team. And the unique thing about it, that all these teams are very diverse. If you look at this picture, so with permission, this is my catchball team, and among these ladies that you see there, we lived in 18 different places. We speak about 12 different languages, different stories, but somehow it works, and I could belong. So this was a bit of my solution, or my way to find my way in this new environment.
Well, I think, do you see the difference in our stories? But it's still about the changing mirrors and anchors. And so there's been this progression of identity from the old ways that people did it. I just had a simpler way of, going between two countries. She's had the multiplicity. And now, what about now and where we're going? Because the world is changing. And I really appreciate Daniela's thoughts about it.
So this is a bit the way to look at what is going on right now and how is it different from the present generation and maybe looking into the future. So the one significant thing that we can see is that through all this technology and communication, we suddenly can make communities online. And one good example is this experiment that I decided to do like a year ago when I felt that I don't have my professional community. But I've seen that there are so many other professionals that are doing kind of the similar things, and we cannot communicate, and I needed my community. I could not rely anymore on my own communities in the places that I lived because they didn't get what does it mean to live this kind of lifestyle? So it was really mind-blowing, because all we did is open this affiliate, and within days it was booming, which means that there is a need. But the beauty about it is that suddenly we can have communities online. And the other thing we have is that in this generation and in the future, these losses that we used to have when we moved now are changing. We can actually keep some of these relations. I have my best friends living right now in India, and it's a miracle, but we're still very good friends. So we can do things differently. The other thing is the mobility that we mentioned before. So we are moving into a world that we will be moving faster than ever before. And we will be moving a lot, which means more anchors. So yes, it's wonderful that we can move, but there are also consequences, because it can be also very confusing. And the other part, it's about the family. And that's, I used to think when we just started the conversation, initially I said, you know what? This is the one part that maybe remains very stable and doesn't change as much, because we still live in families. But then we kept talking about it, and we realized that it's not so true. What we had in the past was, within families, we had some similarities in the general identity, and there was an expectation that we will all be the same. So we are an Israeli family, and we are all Israelis. But you know what? It's not there anymore. I have, as you saw, 4 kids. They have 3 passports. The other day we were sitting in the dinner table, and one of my kids, Uri, was saying, okay, yes, we are Argentinians, but honestly, what is Argentinian about us? Then Naama jumps in and says, what do you mean? We are totally Argentinians. Like, we speak Spanish, and we eat chimichurri and dulce de leche, so this is... But the thing is, they began to talk. And for Naama, it was very, very important to hold that part of their identity. And Uri was actually willing to give it away. So you see, the same family, the same kids will end up feeling differently about the anchors. What is the difference? Is the sense of belonging. And as a hint, I will tell you that Naama, her best friend, is Argentinian. She is exposed all the time to the language. She eats much more dulce de leche than Uri. And Uri doesn't have anybody that supports that part. So it's all about the sense of belonging that you can add to that anchor.
And I'll say one other thing, even with family. Somebody gave me great advice just in general, not about cross-cultural families, but I think it applies. She said you have to learn to re-family at every stage of life. And that has been something for me, and I think even for us with these changes, because I've seen certainly in a lot of families where parents resent their children for not keeping that family identity or that national identity. And parents will, say that my kids are such and such, and don't you try and tell them they're TCKs or something. I mean, they're just whatever they are. And I think we'll give them 20 years. But that's okay. And so we don't have to be afraid of that. But we can give, like I think what Daniela does, is giving that permission to her children, like, okay, you can, where you belong, and where you feel that, you can be that.
So we are going back to the point that it's very important for us to make, and it's the need to belong and the sense of belonging. So I hope that when you think about your anchors and think about them and name them, if you can think deeply, where do you really feel that it's also fulfilled your sense of belonging, you will see the difference, and you will see how it reflects in your own identity.
I just wanted to say at this point, again, what I said at the beginning, but I want to say this again. Do you hear how much I've learned from Daniela? I never thought about these things. in the way that she's talked about them. They were kind of, I didn't even think about my own story in the sense of my identity. I just thought, oh, these things happened. And I thought, no, it has been a journey to find out who I am, and probably it's everybody's journey in a certain way. And I think that as we live these lives where the change in our anchors and mirrors are so rapid and so profound, it's not only in our identity, but you also do realize that every one of those movements is part of the mobility and the loss. And so when you couple those two things together, you can understand why this life has challenges. But you can also, I think, see how the richness increases, because we have such huge opportunities to experience so much and to be in so many places. And just not so many places, you're a rich community for me. The things that I have learned, from being here are just marvelous. So if you're new, I want you to know you have the same value as anybody who's been here 20 years, 21 years like Anne, because we are a community that is working together to try and give language and understanding in a way that I don't know many other communities are, because many of them are not cross-sector, or they're just one profession. And one of the beauties we have here is that we can share from many groups. Okay, now.
So now let's take it back to you. Take a second and just think about your anchors and mirrors. Try to name it to yourself. Take a moment, and it might be a very long list of things. Then think about the ones that actually fulfill this need to belong. And then maybe think, what does it say about you? And now rethink, after hearing all that, how would you introduce yourself? I will give you a hint. So,
What's the hint?
so how do you introduce yourself?
I just say, if somebody says, who are you? I just say, what do you mean by that question? Because I really don't know. I was thinking, though, this thing made me think about some things. I married a guy who was from a Dutch subculture. I was the first non-Dutch in his little family. And I worked for his father-in-law, and so I had my Van Reken name tag on in his office the first year we were married. And these people, mostly Dutch patients, would come, and they'd say, oh, what was your maiden name? And I'd say, Frame. And they'd go, Frame, Von Frame. They're trying to figure out, and then I finally say, well, I'm not Dutch. And they say, oh, you're not Dutch? You're not Dutch? Well, what are you? And I had never had anybody ask me before what I was. And then they'd say, okay, Jackie, here. Well, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. But that was okay. That was what their sweatshirt said. But and if I asked you, what would you say?
Okay, by now I answer, well, it's complicated. And that's my answer. Then I see if there is a room to elaborate that. But if not, for me, this is satisfying, because by saying that, I'm saying that I'm not giving up parts of my identity that are really important for me. I'm not willing to compromise, and I cannot just pretend to say, yes, I'm Daniela, I'm Israeli. No, because I am Israeli, and I'm very proud of it. But I'm also Argentinian, and I also lived many years in Belgium, and I now live in the US, which I didn't mention. And no, why? Why didn't I?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we're not important.
No? So I really hold on this, it's complicated, which means to say that I do believe that we're moving into a world that we have complex identities. And when you look at this room, we are kind of the pioneer. We are part of the experiment, because I do believe that the world is changing to that direction. And we are the first guinea pigs, and we are kind of learning how it works. And no wonder that in many ways the world is looking at us to see, what works and what doesn't. We bring diversity, we bring knowledge, we bring a lot of things that we learn, but the learning is painful. So we hope that by understanding our stories and taking really the meaningful parts And answering these questions, we will contribute at least a tiny bit to all this discussion. And if we can only add this part of our adults, just to understand that it's much more flexible, complicated, fluid. I don't know, I don't have the names in English. But we have to keep our heart open and mind open and to listen carefully to how people present themselves and what they really are trying to tell us. We want to try to summarize what we did here before we leave it to you for some questions. So we started by saying that the world is changing, and we are moving from identity for life to complex identities. And we are using our anchors only if we feel that we really belong.
And so do you have anything you'd like to add from the papers that you just put? Anybody be brave enough to say, even in this one little hour, did you change your identity at all? It was a quick one, but anyway, yes. Have a seat. Yeah. Well, do you have another mic? Or just grab this one.
We can hug again.
I'm Stephanie. Thank you so much for your sharing, and in an intimate way, but to our whole community. I have a reflection, maybe it will prompt a comment. I'm a person with less cultural diversity in my personal experience, and I appreciate being included in this community. But I wonder if the stories of cultural diversity really help people with more stability in their story to see their own growth. I'm a psychologist, and I hear stories of growth of people at different stages. I think it was last year we heard Lois Michon talk about important events that happen around the age of 26, 27, and of course we see it at all stages. And I wonder if we don't see it as much when we're in the same culture. If we walk down a corridor of different cultural rooms we've lived in, I don't see mine so clearly because it's the same culture from room to room. So maybe the diverse cultural experiences of our peers reflects more to one another in our stories.
Thank you. She's just like, oh, you got the mic then, I guess. Hello? I think what I'm hearing you saying is that in a certain sense there's a process other people go through, but they may not see it as easily. And I want to also say that one of the whole things I think about our community is that sometimes when we see things in starker contrast because of this, we can apply what we learn to people of all kinds of backgrounds. And I've been doing things with foster kids because they also have these anchors and mirrors that every time they switch families, and certainly refugees. And this last year I've had a lot more opportunity in the States to do things for groups that are mobile in ways we don't think about and culturally mobile, and they get it. And so I'm thinking that we really are in a huge global conversation. If we even learn about it from ourselves, we can share it with others in a translated way, even if it's a totally different external experience. Internally, it's still that same issue of losing my roots and my anchors along the way. So thank you, Stephanie, for that. All right, we're done, I think.
We have time for just a few more questions, but as you ask your questions, just remember that we are live. So don't say anything that you wouldn't want to say in front of a whole bunch of people. So who else has a question? Yeah, no one. No one now has a question. She just shut down the whole thing. Sorry.
Fortunately, we forgot.
Okay. I'll come to you next.
Thank you so much. My question has to do with your reference earlier to the change in technology and also the ways of communicating using technology. So do you find that these new opportunities for communicating using technology allow for more continuity of identity, or does that mean that people are able to hold on to particular aspects of identity as they're interacting with different individuals around the world?
First of all, thank you for the question, and I think it's a great one. I wish I could give you an answer that is really research, and I can prove it by research. But the thing is, the changes are much more faster than any kind of research. So all I can answer is based on my experience and what I believe, and I can try to defend that. So what I've seen is actually it does contribute to stability and sense of stability. One of the best examples I have is actually through my work. So I had one client approaching me, and she was at the time based in Israel, and she found me through the internet. And she said, okay, I'm a TCK, and I'm looking for a TCK support. And I said, wow, wonderful. But her mother tongue is English. And I'm very apologetic. And I said, well, you know, I have a lot of contacts in Israel, and they're very good professionals over there, and I can totally refer to, you know, one of my friends. And she was very strong and kind of put me in my place, and she said, no, 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 you don't get it. I move around. This is the lifestyle I'm having right now. I need one person that I can take with me wherever I go. And I looked for somebody like you, and I looked at your CV, what you did, where you lived, and I think you get me. And I don't care how good is your English. So then I was like, okay. And that was my first moment that I started to understand what amazing potential we have through this technology to create this stability. And this is only one example, because since then, I've seen it happening in so many other ways. And there is a choice to make there. We don't actually maintain our identities in the same way. As I told you, it's important to find out where did we find the belonging. So I definitely seen people and myself investing in certain communities that I keep alive through technology, and some others maybe not. But I have the possibility to keep them alive.
Okay. Oh, I agree. I think the one thing that Alice Wu has done quite a bit on technology, and she's not here this year, but for among TCKs, and that one of the problems is, I mean, the good thing you can keep going, but one of the problems is sometimes kids don't want to go ahead, they only stay behind. So that's kind of a new challenge for some parents, and also that some of the kids feel like they feel so lonely because they're talking to their friends back there who are still all together in person, and they can't be with them. So, but basically, I think, you know, it certainly offers many more potentials. I did want to say one thing. When we were talking before about all of this being new, I think one of the reasons some of you researchers are having problem is because it doesn't fit old models. And you're going to have to do a little convincing, or you're going to have to do better understanding to talk to your academic people about what is this global change. Because so many people that I hear that are having problems, they say it doesn't fit. And Ann Cottrell and Sarah Gonzalez have been working with this network, which has been huge for all of you who are in the research network, because again, people doing actual research and all these things. But get your research out there, get it published, because what I keep hearing is everybody says, well, there's no research. And I think, well, there's a whole lot of people doing it, so I don't know why you can't find it. But the research is also hugely important, so we can begin to change, so that in academia and all that, people can be teaching people what to do. All right, did we overtalk our time? We did.
This maybe goes along with what you were just saying, but earlier in your presentation, you had several circles around the thing, and like the different categories. I know it said traditional TCKs and then refugees, whatever. One of them said domestic TCKs. Could you define that for me?
It's somebody who doesn't change countries, but changes cultures in that country. So you can go like New York to Mississippi might be a fairly major culture change. The outback in Australia to Sydney might be one. For a kid in Nigeria growing up from the village, moving to the city can be a big cultural shift. So you don't always have to move countries. One of the reasons for the CCK model is because you can even live in the same city and be a cross-cultural kid, like you might have a grandmother with one language and another grandmother. So it's not positionally dependent. You know, it's not on the place. But a domestic TCK is you can move in between cultures without leaving your country. Thank you for the question.
David Hodson, International Family Law. A slightly off side question. Over many years, I've been trying to encourage national and international governments to change the law to improve the position of international families and their children. The problem is, and this is not specifically FIGT, but it certainly relates to international families, is that there's no vote, there's no constituency for the international family. Either they've left their home national country, in which case out of country, out of mind, out of vote, we're not worried. Alternatively, they've moved in to the country and they'll only be there for a few years and therefore they're only short term. And we're now of such a large constituency in the world that we've got to start persuading national governments and international governments, I think particularly the EU, the United Nations, etc., that we've got to change the laws to make it easier for international families to move around, to know what the certainty, the predictability, the clarity of what their position will be, because we've got laws, immigration laws is one obvious area, which is simply standing in the way. I'm not talking about the gender laws, because they are another area altogether. We've got to face culture issues there. But certain immigration laws and laws like that, which we can relatively easily change. If we were a corporate group here, we wouldn't be having these problems, because they'd say, oh, Microsoft, we will change the law around the world to make it easier for you to trade. We've got to say to ourselves, we are now such a large community within the globally wealthy world, if I can use that ghastly expression, that we've got to start using our influence, power, democracy, as it were, to persuade international governments that we've got to change the laws to make it easier across a broad spectrum. So very much an offside question, but certainly within this discussion, we've got to say, yes, there's belonging, but actually belonging carries responsibility, not just on us, but also on the governments and the communities in which we are.
And I wanted to say also thank you for that comment, and you got a new assignment. That's how it grows. Because I don't know anything about international law, but it's terribly important, and each of you sees that subcon, and how can we do it? Because you understand this is a grassroots organization, but we keep needing to get it so that each of you who go back to your organizations, to your fields, to your universities, somehow you carry that message and use your thing. So I really appreciate what you guys do and what all our sponsors do in helping families in an organized corporate kind of, organizational way. And so thank you. And next year you can do a report on how far you got.
Well, thank you, Ruth and Daniela, very much. We appreciate you doing this for us. It's a great conversation to think about identity and belonging, so thank you. In terms of identity and belonging, Ruth has done a huge amount in this field. I'm not going to say more than anyone else, but I want to say that. In terms of someone who's the visionary behind all of this, right? And I remember talking one time with Ruth about this, and she said, well, I had no idea where it was going to go. And I started it because I saw a need, I felt a need, I saw a need, and I responded. And I can't think of a better thing to do in our life, right? We were talking about connect and lead and change, that when we see a need in the world, to actually do something about it, even if we don't know what that's going to be. And I think for Ruth, she's a great example to me of what that is, because with an open hand, she just started this, not knowing where it was going to go. And here we all are today because of her. If there's someone who's connected us to one another and to ourselves, it's Ruth. If there's someone who's led the way in research and the narrative, if there's someone who's changed the narrative, right? Who's changed the research that's happening, who's changed us, who's changed people all around the world, it is Ruth. So I know, and she's also one of the most humble people I know. And I think all of us know this about Ruth. So when we say these things about her, she's going, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. I know, she's holding her comments for now. And another thing about Ruth, any of you who've had a conversation with her, she makes you feel like you're the most important person in the world while she's talking to you. And I think she genuinely believes that about every person that she's talking to. And that's another thing that I really appreciate about you. But thank you for the way that you have connected us, you have led us, you have changed us. We are proud of you and the work that you've done, the things that you value and have built your life upon. We appreciate deeply. We are thrilled that the work that you've done on behalf of others has been formally recognized. So there's a little announcement that's coming here. It delights me to announce that for her lifetime achievements, Ruth Van Reken has been awarded an honorary doctorate from Wheaton College and is now Dr. Ruth Van Reken.
I really, when the president of Wheaton College called me, he said, hi, this is Phil Reken. Well, I have a brother-in-law who's Phil Van Reken. I'm thinking, Phil Reken, yeah. I thought, oh, Phil Reken. And he said, I think I have a surprise for you. And I said, what? And he said, we've decided to give you this degree. And I said, I think I should sit down. But on that day, what I was feeling was, not only where do we go from here, like, it's sort of like, does it really matter? Because sometimes you think it's a lot of work to try and push this someplace else. And of course, I was profoundly moved. And then I found out later it was my FIGT friends who, for 2 years, had worked behind the scenes to try and gather the information and send it in to, they tried another college first, they refused, but I didn't have enough money. Apparently you have to give some, but anyway. But my first thought, my very first thought, honestly, was if it wasn't for the FIGT community, I wouldn't have learned enough to do what I've done. You have no idea how much I've learned from you. And you have no idea how this wouldn't have happened if all of you didn't do your gifts. As anybody who knows the story goes, there were 4 of us that sat around the table, thought we should try something because there wasn't anything happening. Okay, fine. They said, who's going to pay? I said, I don't know, we'll just try. The first FIG conference, one of the friends had a husband who worked for Eli Lilly, so they gave us a room. So we charged $25 for one person and $40 for a couple, because I didn't think people would come if it was too expensive. And we started, and that's all. But by the second year, my different friends, for different reasons, couldn't do it. I had 6 people coming. I had a great program, and it was 3 weeks before. And I thought, this isn't going to go well. And so I was in tears, and somebody called me, and she volunteered to help. But I realized I do not have the gifts to do this. I can see it. We'd laugh about it becoming global. I mean, that was just a joke. But in a way, it wasn't. I thought, no, it could be. But I couldn't do it. I have no administrative gifts. I have no organizational gifts. My own daughter has to pass out the Christmas gifts because I can't even figure out how to organize how we're going to get our Christmas gifts out to the kids. And so we had a meeting. We said, if anybody wants a conference to go, you have to come, and anybody who wants it, you come. And Beverly Roman and some others came, and Beverly was the one then who put us into a 501(c)(3) and all the rest of it. And as one person told me, the best thing I did was get off the board, because I'm not even a board person. I just mess it all up. I keep thinking, I wonder about that, I wonder about that, and they think we're trying to get on with something, Ruth. But in this incredible way, and seriously incredible way, this has grown because of all of you. Working together, encouraging each other. using your gifts. And I just, every year I come and I think this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. But it is, you are such a gift to me, and it's because of you that I'm going to give it this award. It's going to be on May 11th and 12th. Hopefully I can walk across some commencement place. And I'm just grateful. I'm grateful, and I felt that day, I said to him, I said, I will receive it on behalf of all my friends who have been told that this topic doesn't matter when they've tried to get a research or something else. It does matter, guys. And finally, some academic group is saying, oh, we're getting it. So thank you for being you. Thank you for what you've given me in my life. And like I said, I hope you receive what is coming to me as coming to you as well, because I know that's why it is. And so, thank you.